Hello, welcome everybody. Let me just check. Yep, everything looks good. Welcome. Thank you for joining session 6 of the Lightroom training with Joburg Photowalkers. Glad you're here. Hi, Ina. As always, you can just pop any questions in the chat. I will be keeping an eye on the chat and seeing if there's any questions. So as we carry on, just in the chat, put some questions for me. Today we are going to be moving fast again. We are looking at cropping and on the at the geometry panel. So they are sort of related. Hi Roger, hi everybody, hi Colette, Deborah, Ina. Welcome, welcome. Good to see some familiar faces in the chat. Welcome to everybody joining now. Great stuff. Okay. So like I said, we're looking at cropping, we're looking at geometry. They are related and you'll see why just now. Cropping, I think, is probably the most widely used tool in photography editing. Any editing program that you would be using, you would find a variation of the crop tool. It's been done since the days of film, and it's still one of the most widely used tools, especially in cases like news photography, so editorial news, and especially sports. Cropping is done quite extensively. When a lot of sport photographers like shooting a little bit wider because things are moving fast, so cropping is their go-to tool to get the framing that they actually want to submit. News editors will use cropping very often to change the frame a bit to fit where it's going in the press. So it's a very widely used tool, and it's a very handy tool. It's also a very fast tool to use and a quick one to understand and to learn as well. So that's why we've got more examples than in previous sessions, but we'll move through them pretty quickly. Okay, just before we start, a bit of housekeeping. I will be traveling for 2 weeks, most likely, and that would include at least the next session. And because I won't have the whole live streaming setup there, the next session next Tuesday will most probably be a recorded session, but it's going to be a good one, and I think it's suited for a recorded session because we will be covering the built-in Lightroom camera inside of the app. A lot of people don't know, but Lightroom Mobile, especially if you put it on your phone, it's got a built-in camera that you can use. It gives you access to things like raw images and manual controls that you wouldn't find generally in the normal camera on your smartphone. So you get some extra things built in there, and it ties back into Lightroom, so you can save those images straight into your Lightroom catalog, which is quite nice. And because we're going to be covering that camera and I'll be traveling, it's going to be a good one to do on site, recording my screen and showing how the camera works. So that's going to be next week. Like I said, it's going to be a recorded session that will just go live at the time, but more details will follow. If you're in the WhatsApp group or on the email group for this training, you'll get all the details. And yeah, that's going to be at least one session recorded, maybe even the one after that. We'll see how it goes and when I'm back. Okay, great. Simon, welcome. Ziavet, welcome. Yeah, it's looking good. Glad to see everybody's up and about in the chat. Okay, so as we go, just pop any questions in the chat. I'm going to be doing today's session on my iPad. So the mobile version, again, just on a larger screen size, but all the functionality is exactly the same as on the phone Lightroom version, and almost exactly the same what you'd be using on your laptop. But everything we do today you'll find there, and most of it, to be honest, that we're doing today you'll find in pretty much any photo editing software that you might be using. Okay, great. Let me share my iPad screen and we'll get started. There we go. So we've got quite a few examples to work through today. And the very first one is, again, one from one of my favorite photo walks of the last while. This was the sprite walk again with Roger, and basically behind me was the waterfall. Anybody who was on the walk, the Joburg Photowalkers walk with Roger, knows the waterfall, the dam wall behind me. And I was just looking the other way and I saw a dog running past, and I did a quick pan. Now, how can we enhance this image? One of the most basic tools that's very often used, like I said, is the crop tool. And I think we can do a bit better by cropping this. So the crop tool, if you have a look on the side here, it's right under this red dot I've got there. So the crop tool is sort of the third one down, and it looks a little bit like that. So it's basically changing the frame or the frame size, and that's the little sign that it's got. So that's what we're going to be clicking on. On Mac, it is Command C. On Windows, I would assume it would be Windows C, I would guess. I'm sure there's a shortcut. You can see it in your help menu as well. You'll see all the shortcuts. Or if you hover on Windows, if you hover over a button, you just leave your mouse there and don't click. Generally, it will pop up the name of it, and the shortcut will be next to it in most cases. So it's worth getting to know these shortcuts. It will speed up your editing, and especially for tools like cropping, it's good to know the shortcuts because we use them so often. Okay, so we're going to go cropping, and then our little cropping panel pops up. So we've got all these, this whole panel on the right hand side, and this is all our controls we get with cropping. So the very first little drop down we've got there, it says aspect. If I drop it down, it gives me a lot of aspect ratios. Generally, if you've just imported an image, the blue one in this case, so the one that's selected, is the original aspect ratio for this image. I was shooting micro four thirds. Oh, it's R. Ryan says thanks Ryan, the cropping tool is R on Windows. That's helpful. Okay, cool. So Command C for the Lightroom mobile on, or Lightroom, the new Lightroom on Mac. Okay. So like I said, as soon as you open up this aspect ratio drop down, by default it goes to whatever the original aspect ratio was that you shot. This camera was micro four thirds, so I've got a 4:3 ratio. Most cameras these days will have a 3:2 ratio, and this is in the landscape orientation. So if you flip it, the general cameras you find these days, the sensor aspect ratios would be 2:3. If it's portrait orientation, my camera would be 3:4. So just to give you an example. And if I need to crop it, let's say for Instagram, and I need to have it square, I can just go 1:1. Now I've got a square aspect ratio. You'll see the frame change to square. I can go back to my 4:3, and what I can also do is just double tap on this frame and it will go back to the original crop I had. So anytime if I change this crop, I'm going to drag one of these corners, I'm going to change the crop. If I don't like it, I just double tap it on mobile and it will go back to the original. Okay, so this is where we can get all the preset ratios, and we can pick from any of these, or we can just have a custom ratio and make our own. Okay, then together with that, right below where it says 4:3, let me show you, right next to the red dot, you've got a little lock sign. What this lock means is my aspect ratio is locked. So even if I grab onto the side here and I pull the frame, the whole frame, the aspect ratio is going to be preserved. So you'll see the top and the bottom is also moving in while I'm cropping. If I unlock this little lock and it's open, then you'll see if I grab the side, I can actually just move the side and completely change the aspect ratio. So if you're doing things where you need to fit within a specific aspect ratio for a specific social media application, or if you need to be printing in a specific print size or canvas size or paper size, then you probably want to select the appropriate ratio and then lock it so that as you crop, it stays in that format and it will fill your page or your canvas or whatever you're printing to. I'm going to go back to my original aspect ratio. Let me just reset that back to the original photo. I'm going to have the little locked so that I stay with my 4:3 ratio. I like this ratio quite a bit, so I'm going to stay with that. Right next to the lock, right over here, you'll see there's a little square with an arrow. That would flip your frame from either landscape to portrait or portrait to landscape. So if I click that, you'll see now I've got a portrait orientation. If I click it again, I'm back to my original landscape orientation. Okay. We'll have a look and a discussion just now about why we crop and how we can enhance images with crops, and we'll go through a few examples. But for now, we're just looking at the tools and how they work. You can also flip the image in this cropping tool. So this isn't strictly cropping, it's just rotating and flipping. But if I had my camera rotated, very often, even in the modern cameras where they've got sensors, so as you flip your camera, the camera knows it. It senses that it's in portrait orientation. If you take an image, it will rotate it when you're importing. So it will always be the correct side up. With older cameras, that sensor might not be in there. So if you're taking portrait images, they'll be sideways, and you have to click this little rotate button to get it to be the correct way up. And we can just keep flipping it around. What very often happens, even with modern digital cameras, if you're shooting up or down at something, so maybe you're on a ladder shooting down at a subject, doing product photography or something, a slight tilt will make it think it's either in portrait or landscape, and it could come in with the wrong side to the top. So your real top, the top you wanted in the image, could be on the side, and you just flip it around to get the correct orientation. Okay, so that's an easy fix. If we wanted the dog to run the other way, we could just mirror image it. It's that middle button. So this is our flip button where the red dot is. This is our mirror. This is rotate, sorry. So that rotates it like clockwise. Every time I press it. This little one above the red dot is our flip, like left to right. So it flips it horizontally. And the next one is a flip vertically. So we can also flip it vertically. So he's now on the ceiling. We're just going to take it back to where we started. Okay, so that's all the buttons there. And then we've got a very little useful button that says straighten. So in different iterations of Lightroom and also in some other editing software, you might have an auto straighten horizon button. In some of the Lightrooms, you also have that. The other option for that same little tool that works similar but a little bit more manual is sometimes you've got a little thing where you can draw a line and it will align that line. So if you've got a skew horizontal, you could draw a line on the actual slant, and what the crop tool will do is it will straighten that horizon line for you, or whatever you put that line on, it will straighten it out for you. Okay, we've got a question. You don't have those options on Mac. Yes, you do. They look a tiny bit different, but it depends also if you're using Lightroom Classic or the new Lightroom. So in the new Lightroom, it's very similar to what you've got here. Basically just gives you a little slider button and a button that says auto right at the bottom, but you can do everything that we see here on the new Lightroom also on Mac. I might be able to share what it looks like on my Mac. Hold on one second, I'll show you what it looks like on Mac. Mac, where's my Mac? So if I do this, so this is my Mac screen with the same image open, and you'll see very similar tools. It's the new Lightroom, it's not Classic. So I've got a straighten little slider here, so as I slide it around, the image will tilt. This little auto button is the same as this straighten button we've got here. So it looks a tiny bit different. They adapted it a little bit for mobile to make it easier to see. Flip and mirror on Classic, no. You might have to go to your edit options, I think, to see flip and mirror. It might not be in on the crop tool, might be in a different spot, maybe in the edit menu. I haven't used Lightroom Classic in quite a while. I know they've updated it quite a bit in the last year or two, but I've been for many years already on what started out as Lightroom CC, and that's now just called Lightroom. So, but you should be able to find it somewhere. Okay, let me just get out of this image on my Mac, and then we'll continue. Yeah, so we're back on iPad. So this little icon right there, that's a little spirit level or bubble level thing. If I click it, it will attempt to straighten any horizon lines or anything that should be straight by itself. So it's automatic. You can see at the bottom, if you look right here, you'll see 0.68 degrees. It basically decided was the tilt, and it just rotated it slightly for me to compensate for that tilt. In images where you've got a horizon line or a table or a floor or something that's very or a roof of a building or something that should be straight, if you press this button, it's really good at straightening that for you. In more organic situations, maybe even something like this image might not do the exact job I want, and then I can just go in and rotate it manually by dragging this little rotation wheel at the bottom. I think right about there is probably going to do it for me. And then if I want to change my actual crop, I could crop in a tiny bit on this. My aspect ratio is still locked. I want to give, so there's a lot of image there at the top. You'll see that really dark part at the top. That's not really enhancing the image at all. And I want to make sure that I give this dog a lot of space in front of him. He's going fast. I dragged the shutter a bit on this shot, so I got that bit of motion blur behind him, and I'm quite happy maybe doing something like this. What you'll also notice is as I'm cropping, there's grid lines popping up. So if you're looking to do something, oh yeah, you found it under photo. Good stuff, good stuff. I'm just popping in the chat as well. Great stuff. So on classic, it would be under photo in the photo menu. To flip horizontal or vertical, and rotate, I would guess, is also then there. Okay, great. So as I keep my finger on this frame and I can drag it, you'll see those rule of third grid pop up. So if I want to put something on any of those intersecting lines, I could do it, and I would guess that's a pretty good crop for this image. Maybe a tiny bit more behind him. I'm happy with the crop as is there. So yeah, it's a nice little handy guide to show you the rule of thirds. So if you're going for that, then at least you can see where those intersecting points are. Okay, so this will do this image. Let's go on to the next one. Again, with sports and fast moving action, it's very often, especially with our new digital cameras where we've got plenty of resolution, it's a good idea to shoot a little bit wider so that you don't cut something off when things are moving fast. And in cases like that with sports or fast moving things, then you can crop back into the actual frame that you might want. Okay, when things are more stationary, maybe in studio work, portrait work, you could probably get the crop very close in camera. Okay, so what we're going to do here is, again, I'm going to lock my aspect ratio. Oh, maybe for this one, let's change it so you can see if I maybe go to a 3:2. So your normal Canons, Nikons, they would be shooting in this ratio. So it gives me a little bit of a less tall frame, and it sort of, in this case, maybe enhances the speed a little bit. Maybe if I go even more, 16:9, so that's sort of your movie feature film aspect ratio, widescreen television aspect ratio. Maybe that enhances the speed even more. That looks good to me. What I might want to do is just get, for me, there's just too much space behind this car, and I just want to reduce it a tiny bit so that the space is ahead of him, so it looks like he's moving that way quite fast. So I'm just going to move this tiny bit in. And other than that, I'm pretty happy with this crop. So now I've got lots of space in front of him. I've got a frame that's actually more like a feature film sort of aspect ratio, and I think it just looks a little bit better for this. So that's the nice thing with the crop tool. It's really fast to use, and it's a really quick fix, and it can change the mood of an image quite easily. Okay, let's go to another example. Again, so this is sport, but luckily nothing that moved fast in this one. What we can do to enhance this crop, if you look at this bottom corner, I've got some paving or something sticking out here. That's, my eye immediately sees it and I can't unsee it. So that's something I would like to get rid of. Also, there's quite a bit of space like below these guys, and I think the trees and the people are more of what I want to feature in this image. So what I'll do is I'll just crop the bottom in a bit until I'm happy. Round about there. That should be a good crop. I've got a sign on the right hand side that I don't like, and on the left I've got a golf cart, like just part of a golf cart sticking out. So a crop somewhere right there, I think on an image like this would do pretty well. Okay, so again, we're just enhancing the image, and it's a really quick fix. We're not losing quality technically. What we are losing is we're losing some of the pixels around the sides. So if we had a 24 megapixel image and we crop down, now it's a little bit less megapixels, but the actual pixels that's in the frame are still there. And with most digital cameras, you've got plenty of room to crop. If you have done magazine work, a lot of magazines, they would say anything down to 12 megapixels are still brilliant for them. Commercial work, that's sort of the cutoff. 12 megapixels is what a lot of people suggest that you have. So if you've got 24 megapixel sensor, you've got plenty of room to crop and still deliver a commercial image. Okay. Studio shoot, portrait, and again, a crop is going to be a quick fix here. So what we've got right here in this top corner is, it looks like one of my lights were just peeking in from behind. Softbox standing around there at the back, something like that. So this is my first issue that I've got, is there's something in there. I can Photoshop it out, and I can also heal or clone it out even inside of Lightroom. But that's going to take quite a bit longer than just cropping it out. And also for me, there's a bit too much headroom here, and I want the focus of this image to be the eyes. So I'm going to crop it quite a bit. I think this is a bit loose for what I want from this portrait. And while I'm talking about this and what I want from this portrait, before cropping, it's good to just have a look at your image, decide what issues you've got. Oh, we've got a question. We'll get back to that. Question is, how do we know what megapixels are left after our cropping? That's a tricky one to know. So if you really want to know it, you can just check your horizontal by vertical pixels, multiply them, and whatever the answer is, that's how many megapixels you've got. So for instance, if you are doing something that's going on Instagram, for instance, the minimum width you can use on Instagram is just over 1,000 pixels wide, or the width that they would actually show. So if you upload anything bigger than that, they actually shrink it down to just over 1,000 pixels wide. So let's say even if we allow a bit more, 1,200 wide by, let's say, 800 high or something, if it's a landscape image, you will just take whatever your X number is, multiplied by your Y, and then that's your megapixels that you've got in the image. And if you do that calculation for most social media, you end up at around 2 or 3 megapixels or something. So that's actually what you need for social media. It's not much. It's very tiny little images that they use on social media, and even if you upload larger ones, they compress it down to that size. But like I said, if you're doing something maybe for print or something, you might have a minimum megapixel size you're going for, or pixels per inch when you're actually working on the print size. But yeah, you can just do that calculation, X times Y, whatever is left. Okay, But generally, like I said, you can crop quite a bit with the new modern digital cameras, even any cameras made in the last 10 years or so. Okay. Before I do this, again, what you want to do is look at this, decide what you want to get rid of, decide where you want the focus of the image, and then go to cropping and doing all these other edits that you might want to do. So for me, I want to crop. It's going to be a fast fix on this image, and it's also going to enhance this image a lot. Probably somewhere right about there going to be a good crop. What I can tell you is, if you're cutting somebody's head off, do it like you mean it. So what I'm saying is, especially in portraits, you either need to have a little tiny bit of headroom above them, so that there's a bit of breathing space, so they don't feel like they're right on the edge of the frame. So either leave a bit of space or crop down and really make the cut as if you mean it. If you just cut the tiniest edge off of somebody's head, it looks awkward. It looks as if it was a mistake. But if you really crop into somebody's face like this and you cut enough off the top, then, well, for me, that just looks better. So do it like you mean it. And I think this crop definitely enhances the image, and now the focus for me is on the eyes, which is exactly where I want it. Okay. Let's carry on to the next one. Okay, so now we're going on to the next tool here. Together with crop, the other thing that we can use to sort things like horizon levels and things and slanted images out is the geometry panel. So if you have a look, geometry panel is right here at the bottom. We might just quickly talk about the optics panel also, because we've done light before, we've done color before, we've done effects before, we've done the detail panel before. So the two left here at the bottom is optics and geometry. I'll quickly talk about optics, but there's not much in there. And then we'll talk about the geometry, which is closely related to our crop tool. So we've seen that our crop tool can actually level out something, so our horizon line can be leveled. The geometry tool we'll see just now, it takes things to an even higher level when it comes to straightening things out. Okay. So the very first thing here is optics. And if you open the optics panel right over here, it will tell you that it can remove chromatic aberration. The CA is chromatic aberration. So some lenses and some, it's mostly lenses that do it, but some camera lens combinations might do it. You might get a little purple fringe around the outside edge of an object or a subject, especially if there's a light area behind them, like the sky or something. You might have noticed green or purple little edges to subjects in your shot, especially if you zoom in and you go and look closely. Some of the older lenses tend to do this a bit more, and it also just depends on how the light is hitting the lens. Okay, so one button, we can switch it on, and now it will remove chromatic aberration. So what Adobe has got is they've got a massive database of lenses and cameras. They will read the metadata out of your image file, out of your JPEG or RAW file, and they will know what camera and lens it was if it was electronic. So if you're shooting with some vintage lenses or manual lenses, you might have to go in and select it. But if you're shooting with modern digital lenses and digital bodies, that information is baked into the file, and Adobe can read it out. And they've got a whole database of these lenses and camera combinations, and they know what issues would arise in different situations. So they basically have targets and things that they photograph, and they know what these lenses do and what issues there are. Okay, so that's how we get rid of chromatic aberration. We just switch that button on. And lens corrections, you'll see when I switch it on and off, look at the top right corner. So if you look right here in my image, you'll see when I switch lens corrections on and off, you'll see things move around a bit and get a bit brighter. So with this ultra wide lens that I used, it's a 11mm lens. It distorts the edges of the frame, and there's also a bit of a darkening of the corners, like a vignette that's built into the lens. and it's just the way the lens handles light. But if I switch this on and off, you'll see Adobe already trying to correct that all by itself. Okay. The one thing to remember is don't just always switch this on. Some lenses have got amazing character, especially some older lenses. They've got a very specific look to them. Even some of the newer lenses, you might buy the lens because you like the look of the lens, and if you go and switch these things, especially the lens correction, on, it will sort of get rid of that very specific look that that lens has got. On the other hand, if you're shooting maybe 2 cameras for a wedding or an event with different lenses on it, it's nice switching it on because it will match the look between the 2 different lenses better. So your images will all look consistent. If you don't use lens correction, in that case, the 2 cameras or 2 lenses might look very different. Okay, so that's just something to remember, and it's just one button. That's a nice little tool that we can use to correct for our lenses. Next, we get to geometry. Now, with this ultra wide angle lens, you'll see that things start to distort, and also my camera was way down, way low down, which means if you look at this image, these lines, and this panel is a rectangular panel on a wall, and it should be straight up on this side, it should be straight up on this side, and like we would expect from a rectangle, the top and the bottom is the same length, which in this case you can see it tapering to the top. The top is actually shorter in the image and the bottom is wider because the camera was low down and it's a wide angle lens. Okay, so what can we do to fix this? If you're doing images of buildings, a lot of the time if you don't hold your camera perfectly level and you just tilt it a tiny bit up, your buildings will sort of get smaller to the top. If you are shooting in indoor locations, maybe for real estate listings or something, very often the corners of the rooms will start distorting a tiny bit with wide angle lenses. You'll see things like, yeah, there's distortion in all the lines that should actually be all parallel in a room when you're looking at it. So for real estate photography, things like that, you might want to fix this. Okay. There's also something called a tilt shift lens that can optically compensate for this, but not everybody has got those, and they are pretty expensive, and some camera brands don't even have that for their newer models yet. So we can though fix some of that in Lightroom, and that's where the geometry panel comes in. So the nice thing with the geometry panel is, if you have a look here, there's a thing that says upright off, and we've got a lot of automatic detection that Lightroom can do all by itself. So if I click the little drop down arrow there next to off, we can get this whole list of options. So we've got options for guided, we've got options for automatic, level would be horizontal, vertical, so it's looking at lines that should be vertical that aren't, and full, so it will straighten everything. So let's have a look at what all this means. And guided is the first option, but generally it's the last option you should try if all the other options fail. Okay, because guided is a manual way of straightening it. All the options from auto down to full are all automatically detected, and it will apply different straightening math to your image to try and straighten things out for you. So we're first going to have a look at all the auto options, and then we'll come back to guided. So the very first one is auto. What Adobe will do, what Lightroom will do, is we'll look at your image and figure out what should be level or vertical, and pick those issues that you've got in your image and try and correct for them, and trying to decide by itself what's going to be corrected. So I'm going to go auto, and you'll see that Lightroom by itself tried to straighten up that panel, that rectangular panel that was on the wall, and it's doing a pretty good job. And we can see we've got a bit of the corners missing there, but we can crop that in and get rid of those white corners, and we should have a relatively straight rectangle there. You can see the top is still at a bit of an angle, which shouldn't be. So we'll have a look at some other options. So that was auto, and generally just running a lot of photos through. If you've got cityscape photos or something like that, street photography, if you want to straighten things out, you can very often just apply auto to a lot of images and see what it does, and see if it does a good job under the circumstances of your images. Okay. Then the next one is we've got level. So if I pick that one, it's going to try and straighten things that should be horizontal. So if you look at the bottom, this bottom part of it, it tried to straighten that for me. So it just slightly rotated the image and tried to straighten that bottom, which in this case is almost the horizon line, but it's where the wall meets the floor. Okay. The next one is vertical. So now it's going to look at lines running up vertically and try and straighten those. So we can tell it to do vertical. And you'll see that now the sides of this rectangle is nice and vertical. And this is a very similar result we got to auto. So basically auto said, oh, there's two lines running vertical. We need to correct for that. But this is not correcting the top and the bottom perfectly. So it's just looking at vertical lines. Okay. But sometimes this is what you might want to correct. Then we've got full. So now it will try and align the full panel to be flat on front view. So it's trying to look for vertical as well as horizontal lines that it thinks should be straightened out. Okay, and in cases where this fails for you, and mostly doing buildings and interiors, this is going to give you a flat view of a wall. But if you want to do it manually, if there's things in your image that you want to adjust manually for correcting your perspective, you can also go to guided. Looking at guided, you've got the little tool here where I'm tapping. That's your guided. And with guided, you basically just tell it where there are straight lines that should be straight, and it will try and correct for them. So if we do something like that, and we'll just keep giving it straight lines that we think should be straight, you'll see it already adjusted that one. We'll give it this line on the side as well. There, it adjusted that one. And that's pretty much aligning our rectangle. So now we've straightened it top and bottom and the two sides. So even from that weird angle with the wide angle lens that we had, where everything was skew and the perspective was moved, we can straighten it out and get a view as if we're looking straight onto this rectangular panel. Okay, so this is quite a powerful thing when you've got lines that aren't running the way they should be. What we can also do is, if you look right here, there's a little switch there, little button we can press, and next to it, it says constrain crop. What does that do? If we switch it on, Adobe will automatically crop your image in the same aspect ratio to get rid of those white areas. So if I do constrain crop, it's going to crop in to get rid of those white areas in my image. If my image was wide enough, I would have been able to see this whole panel. Right now, with the rotation and the straightening, I'm losing corners, and I'm basically losing my bottom of my image. Basically, Adobe can't get rid of those white corners without cutting the bottom of this image off. But now I've got a completely straight face on image, and this constraint crop button that we've got gets rid of those corners at the bottom. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go back to our original one, and you'll see right here at the bottom I can go reset my edits. So this is going to reset everything that I did with this tool, the geometry tool. So we're back here, and just to show you another option we've got in this geometry tool is all these little sliders. So distortion, if you manually want to fix a wide angle lens that actually distorts, maybe you've got an image from a GoPro or the ultra wide angle lens on your mobile phone, you can manually go and correct that distortion and straighten out lines so that it's less warped. The next one is vertical, so it basically swivels your image in to straighten out vertical lines. So that's the vertical one. So we can straighten it out a tiny bit there. Then the next one is horizontal. So it does a similar thing, but it moves your perspective horizontally if you want to straighten out things that skew horizontally. The next one is rotate. So we can rotate the image. So this just rotates it around the center of the image. So for straightening a horizon line or something, you can use this as well. Although the one built into the crop tool is probably a bit more handy. You can change the aspect ratio. So you can make something wider, you can make it taller. That's aspect ratio. And any of these buttons, like the other sliders in Lightroom, double tap on it and it goes back to where it was. Scale, so we can scale it smaller, we can scale it larger. And we still, in one of the future sessions, just to mention that, we will get to healing and cloning tools. So maybe if we create a little white corner, we can also fill that in if we wanted to with healing or cloning inside of Lightroom. A few years ago, this was still something you would have needed to go into Photoshop for fixing. But these days, you can fix a lot of those things in Lightroom, or you just crop those white corners out. That's your other option. So that's scaling. And then X and Y offset. So we can move it left and right. We can move it we can move it up and down, although my up and down slider is not going for some reason. I think one of my other edits might have locked the up and down, but the X and the Y offset just moves it in a flat plane, either in this direction or in the other direction. Okay. So again, I'm just going to reset all these adjustments and go on to the next image. So this was just an example image to show you how you can correct geometry. Okay, now we're going to use two of these tools together. We're going to be looking at cropping and fixing geometry, or just straightening things out a tiny bit. This image, I'm looking at it, I'm seeing the building is not straight. For me, generally, if I'm doing a street portrait like this, or just a environmental portrait in the street like this, I wouldn't mind a building that's distorted by my lens and my perspective, because I think it's part of the character of this image and I might not fix it. This is not an architectural image, it's not a real estate image, so I generally wouldn't be too worried about a building that's not perfectly straight. Maybe for a cityscape, you might want buildings perfectly straight because the buildings are the subject. In a case like this, the building is not the subject. And if it's a little bit not straight, I think it's part of the character of the lens, of all the choices I made for this. But we are going to fix it just as an example. First, I'm going to cropping. The first issue I've got here is this little dustbin. So if you look at this dustbin right here, that's obviously got to go. I can clone or heal it out. I can go to Photoshop, or I can save myself 10 minutes and just crop it out right here because it's on the edge. It's not doing anything in the image. And I think a little bit of a closer crop is actually going to be good in this case. So there we go. No more dustbin. 2 seconds and I saved myself a bit of Photoshop work. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is sometimes a slight crop is a lot faster than jumping into Photoshop or trying to do healing or cloning even in Lightroom. Okay, so we're already there, it's looking better. And the next thing we can do is, maybe if we wanted to see what it looks like, we could go, let's just do an auto on geometry. Didn't do too much. We could go vertical to just straighten the vertical line. So it's mostly looking at the edge of the building. Basically on this side, to just straighten that. If I wanted to, I could also tell it to look at the level. So it's looking at those lines. If we go full, it might be overkill for this image, but you'll see it basically rotated this image so that it looks like we are looking exactly straight onto this face of the building. So previously, in the original image, you'll see my original was set to black and white, but it's raw. So you'll see in the original image, without this, I can go back. So in this image, if you look at the slope of the roof and the slope here of the bottom of the building, we've got a tapering line. So similar to when you get roads going into the distance or railroad tracks going into the distance, we've got that perspective going. What the full geometry option gives us here is it rotates that building and gives us a flat straight on view to it. So now if you look at the roof at the top, it's straight, this line on the side is straight, and this line at the bottom is straight. I think it actually in this case it's not needed. I wouldn't do it, but it's an option if the building was a bit of a feature of your image. If the building was important, you could do that. But I'm happy with an image like this in this case. Again, if there's any questions, just drop it in the chat. Let's go to the next one. Okay. Again, I think this one can do with a combination of tools. Again, we're going to be using cropping and we're going to be using geometry. So looking at the image, this street lamp pole here looks a little bit curved, as does the Hillbrow Tower there. This building is a tiny bit curved, so that's just my lens doing that. Also, I think this building is not really doing much, and now we've got the tower almost in the center of the image, which I don't think I want for this. So looking at it critically and deciding what you need to keep, what's actually going to be part of this image, what can we actually get rid of that's not adding to the visuals of what I'm looking for. And let's get started. So I'm going to start with the crop. I'm going to hit the straighten button right here just to see what it does. And it doesn't do a very good job of straightening things, so we're going to rely on geometry. So I'm just going to back out of that change. What I am going to do is I'm going to crop, and I want to basically get rid of that building on the left. And I want to go pretty close to the building. I think we're getting close, and I might just get rid of, there's something in the road there. I might just get rid of that as well. I think it's a tiny bit distracting. Something like this is probably closer to the crop that I want. I'm going to apply that crop. Next thing, as you can see, everything is not straight, and in cases like this with towers and buildings and lampposts and things, you can see things aren't straight, so we're just going to try and straighten things out a tiny bit. So let's go and do that. We hop into geometry, and again, generally one of the more automatic options will do a good job. You generally won't have to go in and do things manually, so we're going to just apply auto and see what it does. And right there, I'm happy. So you can see if I back out of that, everything is a bit curved and wonky, and if I apply it again, now everything is nice and tall and straight. I'm happy with that. It looks a lot better. In this case, because the tower and this lamppost are sort of the two features of this image, I want them straight. If this was just an environmental portrait or a street photo or something, I might not have cared. But in this case, it's sort of the subject, and I'll take the time to straighten them. Okay. Happy with that one. Let's move on to the next one. Similar situation. We might do a tiny bit of a crop. I think looking at the image, I've got quite a bit of space on this side and also on the bottom. That's not really telling me much of the story of this place. This was one of the photo walks as well. Troyville House. Beautiful place. Nice photo walk as well. I'm just going to start with cropping. I'm going to hit the straighten button first, and you'll see that it just straightened that bottom line for me. I think that's looking already better. Now I'm going to just do a crop to get rid of some of the bottom and some of that right hand side. Not all of it. There's some nice texture on both, but I just want to get rid of some of that open area that's not really enhancing the photo for me. I'm happy with that. We can go to geometry. We can see what auto does just as an example, and it's looking good. So auto should be fine for this. I'm mainly looking for the vertical lines in this specific image to be pretty straight. So we can also try vertical. That can work. Let's see what level does. Level actually, for me, for my eye, I think level does a better job. So it's looking at horizontal lines. I think that's pretty close to what I would want in this case. I'm not going to do any manual adjustments. That's looking good. Next image. Okay. Magnet House. Close to Reef Hotel, sort of across the road from Reef Hotel. Really beautiful building. There's some fashion designers, I think, currently in there. Nice area, Marshalltown sort of area. Okay, let's have a look at something like this. It's street scene, these buildings, and as you can see, this building is sort of getting smaller to the top. All my lines are a little bit converging to the top, and also this building on this side, due to my lens that I use for street photography, is leaning over to the left, going up. So we've got all these little things that maybe we want to fix it, or yeah, you need to decide, is the character that the lens brings to this image more important? Do you like the look of the lens? Do you like that distorted look? And wide angle is actually something that I quite often like, but sometimes it's nice straightening things out as well if there's a prominent building like this. So let's go straight to geometry. I'm not gonna crop anything right now in this image. In geometry, and again, I'm going to first go to my automatic options and just see what they do before trying to do anything manual. I'm just going to hit auto, and already it looks very good. Let me back out of that so you can see. Look at, especially at that darker building in the background, but also at the top of Magnet House. See what it does. That's auto under geometry upright. Let's back out of it again. So that's the distorted one. That's the auto. So it's doing a really good job. The nice thing with this image is there's a lot of lines for it to pick up on and try to straighten. So it's doing a good job in this. We could do level. Level's not as good. We're still seeing those buildings sort of lean closer to each other. Vertical will do a better job. So vertical is very close to what auto did. It's aligning vertical lines. My buildings aren't leaning over or getting smaller to the top. So all these vertical lines running up are looking nice. Okay. So my guess is what auto did is it looked at the image and decided that vertical is the correct thing to do, and it applied vertical. What we can also do, which is very extreme in most cases, is full. So it's going to try and straighten everything so we get a flat view of one of these buildings. And in this case, you see what it did? It sort of rotated the building for us so that we've got a flat on view or perspective of the one side of this building. Very extreme. If we were a tiny little bit out and we wanted this view, applying full would just move us that tiny little bit, and it won't distort the picture as much. In this case, I was almost 45 degrees. I was almost facing the corner of the building, so it's doing a lot of computation and squishing things down to be able to do this. So this is probably not something we want to do in this case. But if you were close to being straight onto a building, going for full might just straighten it that last little bit. In this case, it's not what we want, and vertical gave us the best result, I think. Okay, I'm very happy with vertical, and we're going to be applying vertical. Next image. This is an interesting one, just as an example. Let me just check. Yeah, we've got 2 images left. We're almost done. This is a very interesting image because it was a stitched panorama. So I can't remember, it was a while ago. I can't remember how many images this was, but what I can show you is this image is almost 300 megabytes large. So it's 293.9 megabytes. I don't have a camera that can do that. And I think, yeah, this camera that I used is a 20 megabyte camera. So what I did is I took a lot of images, like going row by row by row by row by row, and then I brought everything into Lightroom, and Lightroom can actually stitch them, fit them together like a little puzzle, stitch them and make them blend perfectly. and then I edited the image and I got to this point. So at this point, with this stitched panorama, I need to straighten things a little bit, because all these images I took are sort of based on a sphere. There's some distortion there. My lens has some distortion as well. So I need to straighten out this house a little bit, and I also need to get rid of everything around the sides that I don't want. Okay. Again, some of these gaps, maybe a gap like that, if I really wanted to, I could fill in with cloning or the healing brush and just fill that little gap so I can cut less. But in this case, I'm happy cutting all the whites off after we've finished and rotated and fixed this image. So first things first, I'm going to go to geometry. I'm going to just straighten it out a tiny bit. So I'm going to ask it to do an auto and just have a look. To me, the vertical lines are looking a lot better. It fixed a lot of the issues with the house looking a bit wonky and also the angle of it. So I'm going to go back so you can see the difference. That's the before. Keep your eye on the house as I press the reapply and you'll see it straighten out. See the house straightening out, and also the lines on the house being aligned more vertical, so it's moving those lines around a little bit to get a better perspective. So that's looking a lot better. I'm happy with auto on this. I'm going to leave it at auto. I'm going to crop it down. Just crop it down. I'm happy with that crop on that side. I'm going to unlock because I want to move this side by itself. I want a bit more sky. The bottom's actually quite nice. I would crop it close to that wall. So that would be my final crop. And like I said, a 293 megapixel image, and Lightroom handles it and edits it as if it's nothing. There's no lag, there's no delay. The one thing that Lightroom does on the mobile version is it generates a smart preview that's very similar to your original full-sized image, but there's some compression in there and it just makes it edit it a lot faster. But as soon as you export, it applies everything to the original image and it gives you the full resolution output. So if I, for instance, zoom in and I go as far as I can where I see some pixels in there, just know that the exported image will be even better. So the resolution there will be even better. So when I start seeing pixels here on the exported image, if I zoom in, I won't see them. It's going to be a better resolution even than this. So this is a 300 or almost 300 megapixel image, 14,000 by 7,500 size. So this is a very large image, and it can correct and do all those calculations no problem. Okay, so if anybody's doing real estate or architectural photography or even cityscapes, these tools are really good. And also stitching your panoramas inside of Lightroom is really handy, and getting these massively large images with detail that you can zoom into. So I don't know of a camera that can give 293 megabyte files, but stitching a pano together, you can get it with pretty much any camera. Okay. So that's quite nice. Our last example, we're just going to quickly straighten and fix this. One of the main features of this image would be these lines running to the door, and it guides your eye into the image. We like that they actually like converging towards that door. We don't want to do anything to try and fix them to be parallel. We want them to be converging. So we're not going to mess around with geometry too much. But what we are seeing is this picture is a bit skew. So these lines, because they're this prominent in this image, that immediately you can see there's something wrong and the image is skew. So we've got a couple of things to fix there. First thing is I'm just going to tilt it a tiny, I might even just ask Lightroom. So I'm just pressing the straighten button, and Lightroom has actually found some nice lines and it's straightened out. So this line at the top of the building right there, that horizontal line is what I'm looking at. Like the one between the brown and the white part of the building, the one just above the door. Now that's nice and flat. That's what I want to see. Okay. The lines at the bottom are also now a little bit more straight because we've rotated this image, so it's looking a lot better. What I am seeing is my building is not exactly in the middle of my of my image. So I'm going to just grab the top corner here. I need to lock my frame. So I've locked my aspect ratio again, just to keep my original aspect ratio as shot. I'm just going to go straighten again, straighten that building horizon level, because I did just reset it. Now I'm going to grab the top corner, and I'm going to use my grid lines, my rule of thirds lines, just to make sure that that door of the building is exactly in the middle of my image. Right about there. Okay. So generally this would be a good crop. Horizon is straightened. The building is now in the middle of my frame. I'm pretty happy with this. What we can do is we can just run geometry and auto and just see what it does. So it flattens the building a tiny bit, and it aligns these lines at the bottom a tiny bit. So that could possibly be a good idea. I'll go back so you can see the before, and if we auto, we get this. Keep an eye on the building. This is the before. This is after the auto geometry. So it just straightens out the building a tiny bit and makes it like more of a flat surface. Even if my camera was a tiny bit skew, it sort of rotated back into perspective. Great. So I hope this helps. Images like this you have to be very careful of. We've got all these lines, we've got all these grids, we've got the building itself with straight lines. Your eye will immediately pick up if something is not straight, if something is slanted, if something is off, if these lines or the building is slightly to the side in your image. Your eye is really good at picking up on these things in images like this. If you're out in a more natural environment, out in the mountains or something, there's not that many straight lines. So even if you get things a little bit wonky, generally won't even notice it, because there's nothing that your eye can latch onto and say this should be straight. In cases like this, you have to be careful and really take your time to straighten everything out. Great stuff. Let me go back to my camera. That was our last image. Thanks again for joining, everybody. Like I mentioned at the start, the next session will most likely be a recorded one, but I'll send out details to the WhatsApp group for the training and also on the mailing list. And most likely what's going to happen is next week, Tuesday at 6, the video is going to go live on YouTube, and I will also be available in the comments. If you've got any questions, you can ask. So you can watch it at 6 next week, Tuesday, or afterwards, and just put your questions then in the comment section, and I will be available in the comments. I just won't be able to live stream with the connection I'm going to have while traveling. Okay, any more questions before we call it? I see some thank yous. It's all good. Masking I haven't covered, so that's a nice topic. I love masking in Lightroom. They've improved it in the last so the last big update they did on the new Lightroom and on the Lightroom mobile, the masking now is amazing. We've got really good masking options. Images where previously I would have gone into Photoshop to do specific things, fix specific things, now we can do it all in Lightroom. The AI technology for automatically recognizing subjects and sky is amazing. So Lightroom is going to be a session, probably not the next one, but we will do Lightroom in a live session, the masking in a live session, and that really changed my life in Lightroom. So I'm looking forward to handling that. So the things that we still need to get to is the actual built-in camera on the mobile version of Lightroom, the masking, the healing and the cloning, loading presets, creating your own presets, using presets, color profiles, loading color profiles, exporting general settings where your images are stored, offline versus cloud, all these things. So we've got a few sessions that we can still get into some of the nitty gritty of it, but the basics I think we've now gotten under control. So yeah, any more questions? Good. Then I'm going to say thank you for joining. If you think of any questions afterwards, or if you're watching this video sometime during the week or in the future, if you've got questions, you can leave it in the comment section of the video. You can also leave it in the WhatsApp group for this training. You can also reply to the email that I send out for the training. Yeah, any questions, let me know. And if anybody has ever got any example images they want to see an edit on, or want something fixed on that we can use as an example, send those to me. I'm happy to have a look at those. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. Good. Have a nice evening, everybody.